The Patsy Cline mystery finally solved and isn't good. What if one of America's greatest music tragedies wasn't just an accident, but a carefully buried secret? For over 60 years, Patsy Cline's death was chalked up to bad weather and a doomed flight. Investigators closed the case, fans mourned, but behind the curtain, evidence was ignored or hidden. Now, a lone researcher in rural Virginia has uncovered something shocking, and it's shaking Nashville's history to the core. A new forensic breakthrough, once dismissed as science fiction, is rewriting everything we thought we knew. The Patsy Cline mystery is finally solved, and it isn't good. Before the crash, before the headlines, before the country canonized her, and a threat to the wrong ones. She grew up on grit, gospel, and dust. Her voice wasn't polished. It was powerful. Too powerful for the world she was born into. She didn't wait for permission. She stormed the stage. While other women in country sang sweet and played nice, Patsy wore bold lipstick, swore like a man, and demanded what she was owed. By the early 60s, she wasn't just charting hits. She was rewriting rules. First woman in country to headline her own tours. First to cross into pop radio without changing who she was. She negotiated her own pay, backed other female artists, and called out producers who tried to box her in. Nashville smiled for the cameras, but behind closed doors, not everyone liked the revolution. There were whispers that she was difficult, that she made enemies, that she'd gotten too big, too fast, and didn't know her place. In the months leading up to her final flight, she was pushing harder than ever, recording new songs, booking risky tours, fighting for creative control. She talked about death often, but not as fear, more like a countdown. She told her mother, more than once, "If I go now, I've done what I came to do." She wasn't reckless. She was ready. But none of it explains why the world lost her in the way it did. Sudden, brutal, shrouded in unanswered questions, because Patsy Cline didn't slow down. She was shut down. It was March 5th, 1963, when the sky over Tennessee cracked open and swallowed a legend whole. Patsy Cline's plane spiraled into a wooded hillside near Camden, killing everyone on board. The official story was simple: bad weather, pilot error, an unfortunate tragedy. It should have ended there. A country music star lost in her prime, mourned by millions, immortalized on vinyl. But it didn't, because something didn't sit right. In the hours after her death, before the press arrived, a handful of locals stumbled across the crash site. They weren't supposed to be there. What they found wasn't just wreckage, it was something darker. Her body, they whispered, was unusually mangled, far worse than expected for a plane going down at low altitude. Her jewelry, famously worn everywhere, was missing. One man swore he saw burn marks inconsistent with aviation fuel. Another claimed the cockpit had been tampered with. They were all dismissed. But the timeline was off. The plane had been in the air for too long without contact. The weather report, issued just minutes before takeoff, warned of an approaching storm system. But no one at Dyersburg's small airport seemed concerned. Why was a civilian pilot, with minimal instrument training, cleared for takeoff in a visibility-killing squall? And why, after decades of country music lore, does Patsy's final flight still feel more like an execution than an accident? Behind the crash was a woman whose career had finally broken through the glass walls of Nashville's tight-lipped hierarchy. Patsy wasn't just successful, she was disruptive. And disruption in 1963 came at a price. The question that haunts her story isn't how she died, it's why she had to. In 1961, Patsy Cline had done the unthinkable. She crossed over, not just into the pop charts, but into living rooms, primetime variety shows, and mainstream American consciousness. Her hit, Crazy, penned by a then-unknown Willie Nelson, skyrocketed past every barrier. Suddenly, a woman from Winchester, Virginia, with a sharp tongue and sharper instincts, was rubbing shoulders with executives used to keeping women quiet. That made her dangerous. The Nashville music industry of the early 60s was a boys' club fortified by charm and intimidation. Behind every rhinestone and steel guitar was a cold war of contracts, favors, and fear. Artists didn't own their songs. They barely owned their names. But Patsy? She refused to play dumb. She demanded royalties. She corrected producers in the studio. She negotiated on behalf of other female artists. And she started talking. Too much, according to some. There were rumors she was preparing to launch her own label, independent of the big players like RCA and Decca. Quiet meetings, secret rehearsals. Song rights shifted between lawyers with no explanation. One man, a studio engineer who later disappeared from the Nashville scene entirely, claimed Patsy had proof that several of her biggest tracks were being skimmed. Their profits rerouted before they ever reached her. The machine doesn't like leaks. Just weeks before her death, her tour schedule was mysteriously rearranged. An invitation to a major showcase in Vegas was abruptly canceled. And in the shadows of Music Row, whispers began to circulate. Someone was going to clip her wings. It was a joke, at first, until it wasn't. Patsy Cline had a voice that didn't just carry, it commanded. It was strong, emotional, unshakably confident. It came from the gut, not the throat. Unlike the docile crooners Nashville preferred, she made pain sound holy and defiance sound divine. That voice didn't just threaten other artists, it threatened the entire industry model. She was the first female country artist to headline her own show, the first to bring a mother's image, not a pin-ups, to the forefront. She wore pantsuits. She smoked in meetings. She didn't hide her disdain for the gatekeepers who told her, "You're just lucky to be here." And she wasn't alone. In 1962, she began coaching a younger Loretta Lynn, teaching her not just how to sing, but how to survive. "Don't let 'em tell you what to wear. Don't let 'em tell you what to sing," she warned. Their bond became a quiet rebellion, a blueprint for female independence in a male-dominated world. But the higher Patsy climbed, the more resistance she faced. There were show promoters who began canceling her appearances without notice. Studio doors that once swung open now creaked shut. Even her closest allies started to distance themselves. Behind her back, they called her hard to work with, overambitious, unstable. Words they'd never used for the men. It was as if someone, or something, had decided that Patsy had peaked. And what happens to a woman who stops playing nice in a business built on silence? In Patsy's case, the answer was chillingly permanent. The crash of N7000P was ruled an accident within hours. No foul play, no signs of mechanical failure. The pilot, Randy Hughes, Patsy's own manager, was posthumously blamed for flying into worsening weather without adequate instrument training. Case closed, except it wasn't. In the weeks that followed, contradictions began to pile up. Witnesses claimed they'd heard a loud metallic noise before the crash, a fireball in the sky. Others described seeing men in suits arrive at the crash site before local authorities. Patsy's autopsy was sealed. The plane's wreckage, instead of being preserved for investigation, was quickly scrapped. And there was the envelope. A charred fragment of mail was recovered near the crash site, later traced back to a bundle Patsy had reportedly carried in her briefcase. But the contents? Gone. Among them were believed to be contracts, royalty statements, and a written draft of her grievances against her label. One backup singer claimed, years later, that Patsy had told her, "If I die, make sure someone opens that envelope." No one ever did. Behind the scenes, her family was told to keep quiet. Her widower, Charlie Dick, oscillated between grief and rage. But even he admitted in an unguarded 1982 interview, "There's things I can't say, things she told me before she left." And in Nashville, business went on, exactly as before. If anything, it flourished. Patsy's posthumous releases sold millions. Her voice, frozen in time, became more profitable in death than it ever was in life. The machine that may have stifled her in private now wrapped her in gold and platinum. It was the perfect outcome for an industry that never quite knew what to do with her alive. But some people were still asking questions, and the answers never quite added up. There are entire months of Patsy Cline's final year that have vanished from the record. Studio logs from early 1963 are lost. Bookings were handwritten and conveniently destroyed in a minor flood, according to her agency. A tape labeled Cline Uncut Vocals 62-63 was reportedly wiped and reused. Even fan letters, once catalogued at her home, were mysteriously gone when her estate was appraised. What was being erased, and by whom? One theory emerged from a man named Hal Sellers, a disgraced former RCA intern who, in 1977, gave a recorded statement alleging that Patsy had been warned before her final tour. According to Sellers, she received a phone call from a former business associate who told her to lay low, take a break, or take a fall. She didn't. Instead, she pushed harder. She doubled her appearances. She sang through illness. And then she boarded a plane no one wanted her on. A flight she almost didn't take. On March 3, 1963, just 2 days before the crash, Patsy was offered a ride home by fellow performer Dottie West, who was driving instead of flying. Patsy declined, reportedly due to lingering pain from a previous car accident, but insiders believe there may have been another reason. Someone was pressuring her to be seen, to attend the benefit concert in Kansas City that capped her final days. A final appearance, a final spotlight. Even Loretta Lynn, who idolized Patsy and received her last phone call, later admitted that the warning signs were there. She was scared. Loretta whispered in a taped interview, "I think she knew something was coming. And maybe, just maybe, she was right." The Grand Ole Opry was Patsy's church, her battlefield, and ultimately, her tombstone. When she first walked onto that storied stage in 1955, she did so as a girl from nowhere, with nothing but a gift. But by the time of her death, she was more than just a performer. She was a symbol of grit, rebellion, and resistance to the codes of country tradition. Yet the Opry never inducted her as a full member. Despite multiple sold-out performances, chart-topping hits, and standing ovations, she remained a guest artist. The honor was withheld. No explanation, no reason, just a silence that echoed louder than applause. Many believe it wasn't accidental. Patsy had become too outspoken, too modern. She openly criticized the Opry's pay structure. She defended artists who were blacklisted. She refused to rehearse with men who'd mistreated female singers backstage. And above all, she talked candidly, sharply, and without permission. After her death, the Opry did what Nashville always does. They mythologized her, a plaque, a tribute show, carefully curated nostalgia. But they never addressed the years of resistance, the meetings she was excluded from, the invitations that stopped coming. Her voice was celebrated, but her fight was buried. And so, even today, Patsy's name echoes in the Opry's halls, not as a member, but as a warning. Long before her fatal flight, long before crazy made her immortal, Patsy Cline had a secret that tied her to one of country music's ugliest hidden scandals. Payola. Pay-for-play was rampant in the 1950s and 60s. Record labels bribing radio DJs with cash, gifts, or worse, in exchange for airplay. Careers were built and destroyed over envelopes slid under tables. And in the smoky back rooms of Nashville, Patsy's name came up more than once. But not because she took money, because she refused to. In 1960, she declined a backdoor deal from a major regional DJ who promised guaranteed spins in exchange for exclusive performance favors. Her rejection cost her airtime across multiple southern states. Her label was furious. Executives at 4-Star Records began quietly shopping her contract to bigger players who'd be easier to control. Then came the RCA negotiations. Cline had long suspected that her label was bleeding her dry. Song credits were misattributed. Her voice was overdubbed without her permission. And someone was siphoning royalties, small percentages, nearly invisible, but cumulatively devastating. In 1962, she began documenting these discrepancies. And then, she got her hands on something real, a memo, one that outlined a covert payment structure from RCA to select radio networks, with Cline's singles listed, but her name excluded from the payout chain. In other words, they were selling her, but not paying her. She confronted her producer. She was told to let it go or let go of your future. 3 months later, her RCA negotiations stalled. 2 months after that, she was dead. No charges were filed, no investigation opened, the memo disappeared. But pieces of the truth still linger in the margins of old contracts, in scribbled studio notes, in the silence of men who made millions while she lost everything. Loretta Lynn never forgot the phone call. It was short, scattered, and late. Patsy had called from a hotel room in Kansas City the night before her final performance. Her voice was tight, her words guarded. But one line broke through the static. If something happens, don't trust what they say. For years, Loretta told herself it was just fear talking. Patsy had been anxious, overworked, recovering from pneumonia. The tour had been grueling, the skies unpredictable. But the more Loretta rose through the ranks, the more she saw behind the curtain. And what she saw terrified her. She saw how contracts were rewritten without consent, how female artists were set up against each other, how accidents happened to those who asked too many questions. She kept Patsy's warning buried for decades, but in private, she began to speak in code. In her memoirs, she hints at a storm no one talks about. In interviews, she deflects, but never denies. And in one rare taped session from the late 90s, she breaks. They wanted her gone. She was louder than they liked. She knew too much. And she wasn't afraid. Even that recording was nearly lost, buried in a label vault, until an archivist leaked it online in 2008. It was quickly scrubbed. Why didn't Loretta come forward? Because she knew what the system could do. She had watched it consume others. Wanda Jackson, Jean Shepherd, even Tammy Wynette, whose own mysterious collapse would one day echo Cline's. Loretta carried the torch, but she never lit the fire. Because Patsy had warned her, if they think you're lighting a match, they'll burn your whole house down. There was one man who tried to bring it all into the light. His name was James Minter, a small-town attorney from Georgia with a passion for music law. In 1964, just a year after Cline's death, he quietly filed a civil suit in Davidson County, Tennessee. The plaintiff was anonymous. The defendants were powerful. 4 Star Records, Decca, and multiple unnamed distribution entities. At the heart of the lawsuit, a claim of posthumous fraud. According to Minter, several of Patsy's recordings were altered and resold without the estate's consent. Unreleased demos had been padded with session tracks, mixed into new singles, and released as originals. Royalties, he argued, were rerouted, not to her family, but to a shell company linked to executives in New York. It was explosive, and it disappeared. By 1966, the case was sealed. The plaintiff, believed to be Patsy's brother, withdrew suddenly. Minter was disbarred for unrelated financial misconduct. His files were confiscated. When interviewed by a local paper in 1970, all he would say was, "They made it very clear. Patsy was worth more dead than alive." No media coverage, no legal follow-up, just silence. Today, no digital records of the case exist, only a single line in an old court docket. Minter v. multiple defendants, voluntary dismissal. But what exactly made him back down? What threats were issued? And who still profits from the silence? Maybe the real question is this: how many lawsuits does it take to bury the truth? They say her voice still lingers. Studio B in Nashville, where Patsy once recorded her most vulnerable takes, has long been rumored to be haunted. Engineers report unexplained distortions when her unreleased tracks are played. Lights flicker, tapes rewind on their own. One intern claimed he heard humming, perfectly pitched, through the playback monitor, even after the session ended. But the real ghost isn't spectral, it's systemic. Patsy Cline's legacy is now enshrined in museums, biopics, box sets. Her image, always smiling, always polished, beams down from posters and playlists. But the real woman? The one who fought, resisted, investigated? She's been erased from the official story. No one wants to talk about the sealed autopsy, the shredded contracts, the warning calls, the lawsuit. But they're still there, buried in footnotes, whispered in bars off Music Row, passed like folklore between young artists who dare to ask too many questions. Patsy's voice never cracked, but the system around her did. And maybe that's the final mystery. Why did it take her death to make her powerful? Why does country music still worship her sound, but silence her story? And who still has something to lose if the truth ever fully comes out? The answers are waiting, still humming beneath the surface, like a song that never got to finish. If the truth behind Patsy Cline's death was hidden for decades, what else have we chosen not to see? Now that the mystery is finally exposed, will we demand real answers? Or let it fade again into silence? Speak up while we still can. Share your thoughts below. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.